Interviewing UK greats like Ryan Howard to Dominique Hawkins, this podcast series features athletes, entrepreneurs, musicians, community leaders making a difference.
Yes, joining us now is the host of What's Next podcast series, Mario. Thanks for being on the show.
Of course, I appreciate it. It's an honor to be on this show.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about What's Next podcast and why it's named that.
Yeah, so I'll start off with just the overall, description of the podcast. So What's Next podcast, we have featured entrepreneurs, athletes, musicians. They all come on to talk a little bit about their show, about their story. Basically, it's a motivational podcast. I wanted to make it to motivate the younger generation, not only the younger generation, but people like me and you. That's the main focus for the podcast. I've had big names like Dominique Hawkins, who's set to premiere on November 1st for my season 2 opener. And then I've had, for season 1, Ryan Howard, Colin Castleton, who's one of the best basketball players in the country, college basketball players in the country. And then I had musicians, Rags and Riches, who's joined this show. But overall, I'm enjoying the experience, and I'm excited for season 2. So.
What was the inspiration to start a podcast?
So I've always been a fan of podcasts, right? It was just about, finding the time to make it and how to make a podcast. I don't know how to make it when I first started. Luckily I went to the University of Kentucky, and I got to able to take a podcast class, and that kind of, gave me the blueprint of how I wanted to do things, right? So after that, I had to take this podcast class. The final project was to make a podcast. I just kept it going, and I'm here now, and I'm hoping to keep doing great things throughout the community. So
you're already on season 2.
Yeah.
Now, what advice would you have to those? Because a lot of times people think you want to go into the podcast or media, right, that you have to get hired by some big company. But what advice would you have to those that just want to get started?
You said it, just get started. That's probably the biggest advice I would say. I know a lot of people who they're kind of hesitant to do what they want to do. I would say the best advice is to get started and don't stop. That's how I learned from this whole situation, is to get started. I wasn't hesitant. Luckily for me, I kind of had to start it, but I always say this to myself. I wish I started as soon as I got to UK. God knows where I could be now. So.
It's funny that's what started. It was a part of a class assignment.
Right, yeah, it was a class assignment. You had to make the podcast as a final project, and like I said, I've always wanted to make it. It's just the timing and how do I make the podcast? And, God put me in a position where I can, make the podcast and get it going. So.
Well, you figured it out, and you have some great guests on the show. Now, if people would like to listen to season 1, tell us about when it premieres for season 2. Where can they find you?
Season 1 is already out. It's on all platforms: YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's all on there. For season 2, it's coming out on November 1st. Dominique Hawkins. That should be on all platforms as well. I'm excited for that one to come out. It's actually my favorite. A lot of people get to get caught up on what's Dominique's story. He graduated from UK men's basketball, the university, and now he's an overseas basketball player, and now everyone's gonna kind of catch up on what he's got going on now. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much,
No
Mario,
problem.
and good luck on What's Next.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me.